For decades, Canada has held a unique place in the heart of King Charles III. As heir to the throne and now monarch, Charles has made over 20 official visits to the country, each leaving a trail of memorable moments, some regal, some touching, and many delightfully fun. Though royal visits often come with an air of formality, Charles has shown time and again that he's not above a good laugh, a local tradition, or even a spot of mischief. Let's dive into some of King Charles's most entertaining and heartwarming moments in Canada, a land he once called his second home. 1. The Klondike Chuckle, Yukon, 2001. Charles's 2001 visit to the Yukon was a frosty delight. The royal tour took a humorous turn during a stop at Whitehorse, where Charles gamely participated in a local tradition, the infamous sourdough cocktail. As the story goes, the cocktail, a shot of whiskey with a mummified human toe, is part of a long-standing Yukon ritual. When presented with the drink, Charles politely declined the actual toe, as most sane people would, but couldn't resist joking, one doesn't often come across garnishes with such bite. Instead, he joined the laughter, toasting the gathered locals with apple cider and donning a Yukon-style fur hat that made even his security team crack a smile. 2. A Royal Square Dance, Saskatchewan, 1975. In the midst of a royal tour across Canada in the 1970s, the then Prince Charles found himself twirling in boots he wasn't quite prepared for. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. During a visit to Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, Charles attended a lively community event complete with fiddlers, stomping feet, and checkered shirts. Caught up in the contagious energy, he accepted an invitation to join a square dance. With a wide grin and a slightly confused shuffle, Charles gamely followed the calls of dos-a-dos and swing your partner. By the end, he had won over the room with his willingness to embrace the moment and his two left feet. The photo of a 26-year-old Charles spinning an elderly local woman was plastered on Canadian front pages the next day under headlines like "Prince Cuts a Royal Rug" and "Moose Jaw's New Dance King." 3. Bagpipes and Pancakes, Nova Scotia, 1983. It was a misty spring morning in Halifax when Charles arrived for what was supposed to be a brief ribbon cutting. Instead, he was swept into an impromptu breakfast bash hosted by a group of Scottish-Canadian reenactors celebrating Nova Scotia's Celtic heritage. After a stirring bagpipe performance, Charles was offered a towering stack of maple syrup-drenched pancakes. When asked what he thought of the meal, he quipped, "I dare say Scotland might adopt this culinary tradition, provided we can smuggle over your maple trees." He then surprised everyone by picking up a drum and joining in on a traditional ceilidh beat. Not particularly well, but with enormous enthusiasm. 4. The Eco Prince Goes Canoeing, British Columbia, 1996. Known for his environmental advocacy long before it became mainstream, Charles often made it a point to explore Canada's natural beauty. In 1996, he took a solo canoe trip with Indigenous leaders down the pristine waters of the Nahanni River in the Northwest Territories. This wasn't a staged photo op. Charles paddled, camped, and even helped cook over a fire. One elder later recalled he asked more questions than a curious raccoon and burned the bannock the first night. But he was humble, respectful, and laughed when the smoke followed him around like a lost moose. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Charles later called the trip one of the most spiritually resonant experiences of my life. It showed the lighter, curious side of the future king, one willing to ditch the polished shoes for a paddle. 5. Maple Syrup Mayhem, Ontario, 2012. In 2012, during Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee celebrations, Charles and Camilla toured Canada with a stop in Prince Edward County, Ontario. There, they visited a sugar shack during maple syrup season. What began as a dignified walkthrough turned into a syrupy escapade when Charles tried his hand at tapping a maple tree. His first swing missed, the second barely made a dent, and the third, to the delight of photographers, splattered syrup all over his trousers. Laughing at himself, he exclaimed, "This would never happen with tea." A local child offered him a sticky high five, and without hesitation, Charles returned it, instantly becoming the hit of the day. 6. Poutine, Quebec, 2009. While Quebec has a complex relationship with the monarchy, even staunch Republicans found themselves smiling when Charles tried his first authentic poutine during a private dinner in Montreal. The dish, a gooey, glorious mess of fries, cheese curds, and gravy, was presented with some hesitation. But Charles, ever the sport, took a big bite. "What an extraordinary texture," he said, trying to maintain composure, then broke into laughter, confessing, "It's like an aristocrat went on a food truck bender." He polished off the plate and later in a speech, subtly thanked Quebec for welcoming me with warmth and with melted cheese. 7. A moose encounter, Alberta, 1998. While hiking near Banff National Park during a private royal holiday, Charles had an unexpected run-in with a moose. According to his security detail, the prince froze in his tracks as the large animal wandered into view. Charles, apparently unfazed, slowly reached for his binoculars and whispered, "I've always wanted a more personal audience with Canadian royalty." The moose stared, blinked, and trotted off, leaving Charles standing in the forest with a beaming smile and a new anecdote for dinner parties. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. 8. TikTok with teenagers, Newfoundland, 2022. Yes, it happened. During his Platinum Jubilee tour in 2022, Charles visited a youth center in Newfoundland where teenagers dared him to join a TikTok dance challenge. The prince, who only recently got his first smartphone, hesitated for a moment. Then, with a mischievous glint, he gave it a try, shuffling lightly to a viral tune while holding Camilla's hand. The video went viral within hours under the caption, "Charles slays in St. John's." Royal aides were horrified. Canadians were charmed. And Charles? He simply said, "Well, I suppose if one must go viral, better in Newfoundland than from a sneeze in London." 9. Talking trees and greenhouses, Manitoba, 2008. In Winnipeg, Charles visited a botanical garden where he was introduced to an Indigenous planting ceremony. He spent hours discussing sustainable farming, soil health, and, somewhat famously, his belief that plants respond to conversation. At one point, he leaned down to a young sapling and whispered something inaudible. A curious child asked what he said. Charles replied with a wink, "I was telling him he's growing splendidly, and that I have high hopes for his future as a maple syrup producer." The moment went viral, and the sapling was later dubbed Charlie Tree. 10. The joke heard around the Rockies, 1981. Shortly after his wedding to Princess Diana, Charles made a solo visit to the Canadian Rockies. At a press conference, a journalist asked how he was adjusting to married life. Without missing a beat, Charles replied, "Well, I'm still brushing up on my etiquette. Diana says I snore like a bear and dance like a goat. So I suppose, very well." The room erupted in laughter, and the prince's dry wit became one of the top headlines in Canada the next day. A relationship built on laughter and respect. King Charles's many visits to Canada haven't just been about ceremony and state dinners. They've been filled with human moments, the kind that reveal a man willing to connect, to learn, and to laugh. From sticky maple syrup mishaps to spontaneous dances, Charles has embraced the unpredictable spirit of Canada with both arms. His love for the environment, respect for Indigenous culture, and delight in local traditions have made his relationship with the country deeply personal. And as he continues his reign, Canadians look back on these fun memories not just with amusement, but with affection. Because if there's one thing Charles has proven time and again, it's that he may be king of the United Kingdom, but in Canada, he's just Chuck with a toque. Subscribe the channel to get such videos.